Thank you, everyone, for joining us with Kate Quinn, the author of The Alice Network. This is a blogger junket. We're going to have bloggers ask Kate a question in relation to her writing, her book, The Alice Network, whatever they'd like to use with their reviews during the blog tour that TLC is hosting. So my name is Trish, and I'm with TLC Book Tours. And Kate, can you say hi?
Hello, everybody. Thank you so much for reading The Alice Network. I really hope you all enjoyed it, and I'm really glad to be here today.
Great. Okay, so we're going to start with Christy at the Cactus Chronicles.
Hi, Kate.
Hello.
So I really enjoyed the Alice Network. Loved it a lot, and I had a couple questions for you. How long does it take for you to write a book like the Alice Network?
That one took about a year, and typically that is about how long I take. It depends a little bit on the book. Some books are problem children and take longer, and some books are dream babies who come into the world already able to sleep through the night and never give you any headaches. But I do average about a book a year.
And what inspired you to write about the Alice Network? Honestly, before reading the book, I had never heard of it, and I love historical fiction, so it was great that I was able to learn more about that and the role of women during that time. So what inspired you to write about it?
Well, I was reading a wonderful nonfiction book called Women Heroes of World War I. And when we think about women on the front lines in World War I, we think Red Cross nurses, maybe. And maybe you've heard of, I don't know, ambulance drivers, women in a few other supporting roles. But I was really gobsmacked because I was reading here about women in spy networks and women who were on the front lines, even as soldiers in some parts of the war. And there were 100 stories in that book that wanted to be told. But in the end, it ended up being the Alice Network that sort of grabbed my attention the most. But really, there are so many stories out there that don't make it into the national consciousness, and frankly, they all deserve books.
Right. I'll see if anybody else has questions for you.
Okay, next we'll go to Margaret at Just One Chapter.
Hi, Kate.
Hello, how are you?
I'm good. How are you?
Not too bad, not too bad.
Good. You probably don't remember, but you and I met in Denver 2 years ago.
I do remember, actually. I'm pretty sure there's photographic evidence too. And there's a very good chance I was wearing the exact same shirt I'm wearing here. I am very low on adult clothes. This is what happens when you work at home and you can wear the same pair of yoga pants all week.
Mine are on me right now.
Mine too. Yeah.
Mine too.
I'm curious about your research. Like you've gone in a totally, away from Rome, and I'm curious, like, do you research everything before you start writing the book, or do you research as you're writing?
Really, you do both, and the research is never done, to be honest. The thing about research is that when you have a new era is that you need to do a lot before you can start writing. And that is because to write a book, you need a familiarity with the historical period that enables you to have the kind of deep dive into the world of an everyday life. And the trouble trying to acquire that is a little bit difficult because in the end it's not getting a single date wrong that will prevent you from being able to write or will sink your book. It's the things that you don't even know you'll get wrong. I mean, it's not trying to figure out when a battle happened or when someone died or when someone was born. Those things are pretty easy to look up. It's the things like not knowing in 1947 what an afternoon tea would cost in London with rationing laws still in place, or not knowing whether zipper on a woman's dress is on the side or in the back. Turned out it's on the side. Who knew? So these are the kind of details that you need to have in order to write authoritatively in the past, and you have to do a lot of reading before you have that kind of familiarity in another world. So there was a lot of research with this book that happened before I even started to write, and that happens anytime you do a deep dive into a new historical period. If I'm writing about ancient Rome or Renaissance Italy, those are historical periods I know well. So the feel of it is very familiar to me, and those facts are at my fingertips without really needing to do a lot of extra work. So going into a new period is always a certain amount of not only extra work, but nervousness. It feels a bit like being thrown headfirst into the deep end of a pool.
Oh, great. Thank you.
All right, next we'll go to Kristen at Critters Ramblings.
Hi, Kate. How are you?
Doing pretty good. How are you?
Good. I actually read your book as the first book of yours that I've read, and after reading it, I was wondering, would you stay in this time period and in this place? I looked at your Goodreads page after I had read it and saw that this was your first, and after your just last question, this was your first in this world and time. And so I'm wondering, would you do something, not sequel, but something again in this world and time? Or are you going to go back to Rome? Or what do you think, where would you go next?
I'm already about 2/3 of the way into another book, and it is another 20th century, and it's a multiple timeline story that centers a bit more around World War II this time. And it centers around the hunt for Nazi war criminals coming to America after World War II. And I have a dual timeline sneaked in there, which is about the Russian female bomber pilots who flew during the war and who were known as the Night Witches. So that's my next one.
I love hearing about the things that are in place. It gets me excited for what's coming up. Next, we'll go to Becky at Literary Quicksand.
Hi. I'm actually going to ask a little bit about the book. I know we've been talking a lot about your writing, which is exciting. But I have a couple of questions. Who do you consider the main character of the Alice Networks? I feel like it's more of Eve's story, but Charlie almost does more of the storytelling.
I think they're both the main character, because in the end, it can't happen without both of them. Because it is Eve's story that is the bedrock. She's the one who sets everything in. She's the one who has the central conflict and who introduces not only the spying network, but also it's because of her enmity with Renee that this entire plot line kicks off. But on the other hand, without Charlie, there is nothing that would have propelled her to tie up all these loose ends that are still there. So Eve is the bedrock and Charlie is the catalyst, and nothing in the end would happen without both of them hooking up together and realizing that they need each other in order to take down the bad guy.
Sure. And my other question is strange, I guess, but to me, the Lagonda almost became a character. And you talked about the research and the familiarity. How did that end up in the story so prominently?
Well, I knew this was going to be a road trip book. And because of Hollywood, we all know the best road trips happen in classic convertibles. So I needed a classic convertible, and I started looking at pictures of old cars, and I found this gorgeous picture of exactly that car, a dark blue 1938 Lagonda. And it was perfect, and I wanted it to be a character. That car was very much beloved by the end, and I was lucky because I have a writing friend here in Maryland whose husband has really what I think of as a dream job. He's a private mechanic to a 95-year-old multimillionaire with an antique car collection. And she and her husband took me back to see the car collection, and I got to look at so many fantastic cars that were all from all over the 20th century, so beautiful. And I can tell you that I was literally sitting in the car that Finn gets in the end, which is the silver Bentley and which he absolutely goes gaga for. I was sitting in that car, and it is every bit as beautiful as he thinks it is. But I'm glad the car was a character because I got really very fond of it.
That's a really cool story. That's something that not a lot of people get to do.
No, it was really quite astounding, and her husband was a huge help, and he and his boss answered some of my questions that I had about the cars, because I don't know anything about cars. And so I had a hero who's a mechanic and who has to sometimes, go on about the technicalities of cars, and I have no idea what a V12 engine is, or what the Dion type rear suspension is either. So fortunately they were able to straighten me out whenever I needed anything technical.
Nice. All right, next we have Leah at Mother's Circle.
How are you? Hi, Kate.
Hello.
So I have a question that's a little bit different. I am a debut novelist myself. My first novel just released in April. And
congratulations.
Thank you. It's been such an exciting road. But I also write a lot for other writers. So my question for you is kind of two-part, is what advice have you gotten that was some of the best writing advice you've gotten? And then in turn, what writing advice would you give to other writers?
Probably
or advice. It doesn't have to be writing advice.
Probably the best advice I got very early on was at my first lunch with my agent, and who is unfortunately she's gone now. She was with me for my first 6 books, and she unfortunately called me one day and in her brisk fashion said that she had stage 4 cancer, and she thought I should be getting a new agent, and she had some wonderful ideas for titles for the next book. And that was literally how matter of fact she was. I still miss her. But she had some great advice for me, and she said that in her experience, 50% of aspiring novelists will sink themselves because they either cannot or will not edit their work. Mm-hmm. And it comes down to, we all love our books. Our books are our babies, and it hurts sometimes to know that we have to take an axe to it to make it better. And there are times when someone will give you advice that you shouldn't follow, like, you can't have a gay character in there because what if it's controversial? It's like, no, that character needs to stay in there because it's part of the story, and that's something you won't back down on. But you need to get an ear for when is it that you need to stand your ground, and when is someone telling you something that you just don't want to hear because you don't want to make any changes to your baby. So developing that ear and knowing when you need to put your pride away and take a hatchet to your own work is something that you absolutely need to develop if you are ever going to become a novelist, because people will always have opinions and people will always have criticism, and you need to have a thick skin, and you need to know what it is that will make your book sellable. That's probably the best advice I ever got, and I do pass that on to anytime I can, because I still think it's some of the best words I've ever heard. What was the second part of the question?
Well, the second one was what advice would you give to writers? And obviously, probably that would be one of the things you pass on, but is there anything of your own advice too that you would share?
That is a good question. I think I would say I see people in a hurry a lot of the time to publish, and nowadays when you have self-publishing, anyone can. And that's a great thing. I'm never going to, take a dump on self-publishing, because I think it's a wonderful thing and it enables people to get all kinds of stories out there. But there is a real value in sometimes writing something that is never going to be published. Mm-hmm. I can tell you right now, I have more than 10 trunk novels that I wrote on the way to getting published, and they never are going to see the light of day. In fact, I should probably burn them to make sure nobody ever sees them someday and blackmails me on the basis of how terrible they are. So, but I don't regret writing them. They all taught me something. Yet, I think at the time, if I had had the option of publishing, I might have thought, this is great. It's the best thing I've ever written. I want to put it up there. And then I would have thrown it up there, and then maybe later I would have regretted it. So I see people in a hurry. They want to be published. They want to find their audience. They want to find readers, and that's great. But I always think you need to evaluate your own work again and do it with a cool eye. So when you finish something and you think it's the best thing since War and Peace, put it back in the trunk for a little while and evaluate it maybe 6 months later and see if you still think that, and see if you still think this is ready to be seen, or see if you think maybe it's better to stay in the trunk while you work on something else and chalk it up to experience. So
I love
I'd say,
that. Thank you.
yeah, that's my thought anyway.
Couldn't agree more.
There's
Yeah.
absolutely no shame in having written junk. Even junk will teach you something.
Well, don't they say always only your mother will like your first draft?
That's good. I like that.
Thank you.
Oh, you're welcome.
All right, so next we have Tina. Tina says her microphone isn't working, so she's going to type out her question.
Okay, let's see if I can, hope I can see it.
Yeah, there's a on the left-hand side, there's a little thing for chat, and it'll show the chat or.
Oh, okay. I think I just saw that.
So,
Oh, okay. Yeah, I can see it. Good.
okay, so she will. While she's typing, there's
Okay, here it is. All right, I'll go ahead and read this out just for the audio. When you write books that move between time periods and characters, do you write all of one story at a time, or do you move back and forth as you write? Ooh, I like that. That's a very good question. And this is the first dual timeline I've ever written. I've always done multiple points of view, but first dual timeline, and it was tricky. And to answer your question, I wrote swapping back and forth. In a sense, it might seem easier to write all at once, but the stories still interact with each other, even if they're in different timelines. And I found it was easier to tease out the parallels between the stories when I was cutting back and forth, because then I could have the example of the women in their different ways having the same experience, even though they're separated by time. And that was easier to do when I was cutting back and forth between the two.
That was really interesting. I never would have thought of that, to wonder how you put those. Well, I have thought about that. How do writers put those things together, the dual timelines, and make it go like cogs in a wheel?
It took a lot of plotting, and it was tricky. It was definitely the trickiest part about this book, because it was something I'd never tried before, but it was a lot of fun. And sometimes parallels ended up popping up where I didn't expect them. And that's always fun when a book starts to surprise you. It's generally a sign things are going well.
Yeah. So the last question we have is from Constance at Staircase Wit. She's not able to be with us, but she submitted some questions to me, and I'm going to go ahead and read two of them. So the first question is, Charlie and Eve discard their virginity in very different ways in an era where this was frowned on. Eve for a somewhat noble reason, while Charlie was trying to establish a connection, dead in pain of losing her brother. Well, was there an intent to contrast their motivation, or did you need a vehicle to get Charlie disgraced away from her family?
That is good. I did need for Charlie's pregnancy to be a catalyst for the plot, and that was one thing I knew in advance that would be something that would get everybody moving and get everyone in the right direction. The way it happened, though, gave me a certain number of choices about how this decision was made and what I wanted to say with it. I didn't want her to have a broken heart, because I knew she was going to have another romance on the road, and I didn't want to give her that baggage of having to get over someone at the same time. And I didn't want to put in something as psychologically traumatizing as a rape. That's not the kind of thing you put in casually without dealing with it. And I wanted to say something about promiscuity and girls, especially when it's a result of something that is like depression, which is really what she is struggling with. Because everyone has their ideas about and they still do today, about girls who sleep around and what is their motivation, and the people judge. And I wanted to say something about how a motivation for sleeping around can be depression, it can be healthy, or it can be unhealthy. And this is something that Charlie is dealing with very much. And this is something too that I hoped that would get the reader thinking. So that was partly a catalyst in Charlie's timeline. And for Eve's timeline, she was motivated by the fact that she needed to get close to a source, essentially, and that she couldn't really put him off in any other way. And so she decided that she was willing to do this. And that was something I put in there because it allowed me to examine, too, what female spies were thought of when they crossed that line. And there was a real double standard that I found in my research. It was this idea that spying was dishonorable, and that if a woman was going to do it, she had to keep her physical honor intact if she was doing something that's vaguely dishonorable otherwise. And I read these notes that were written by men in British intelligence who they're very careful to say, you know, like, oh, our sources don't cross those lines, they're ladies. You know, there's very much this haste to say they never cross those lines. That's absolutely out of the question. And I have a feeling the women who were on the spot in those situations probably were a lot more circumspect and a lot more realistic about what sometimes had to be done in order to get their job done. So again, it was Eve's making that choice was a way to examine the double standard that she would be facing, and the fact that unfortunately, even in a war, people take time to slut shame.
Oh, some things never change.
Oh, they never do. The Madonna horror complex was alive and well, and unfortunately. And if you really think about it, if you want to think about female spies in World War I, I'm guessing probably most of you might have heard of Mata Hari. That's probably a name that rings a bell. Yep. Well, she's not really much of a spy. We don't even know if she was a spy. But the reason people remember her is because she was an exotic dancer, and she had a variety of lovers, and she had a number of pictures of her in sexy outfits. And sex sells, and that's the reason why she is remembered. But the women who did not have the sexy propaganda are not remembered today.
Wow.
Man.
Makes you think, doesn't it?
Yeah, it does. Yeah, it really does. All right, well, we just had Serena from Savvy vs. Wit join us, and I'm going to let her ask the last question.
All right.
Sorry about that. I was a little late today. I was just curious about your writing process and outlining, and how detailed you get in outlines, and how much time do you set aside to do that?
I do a lot of that in the early stages. This book took a lot of plotting because the plot was very intricate, and because when you're writing something with a big mystery component, which this had, you need to release information to the reader gradually. So kind of like sprinkling the trail of breadcrumbs, because it's annoying, to a reader when you keep withholding too much. You have to keep feeding that information out in a regular way. And so that did take a lot of plotting at the beginning. I use Scrivener, which is a program I love, and it enables me to get a lot of ideas out there in the early stages and let me sort of see them in various visual ways. And this book did take a lot of work at the beginning, and that's honestly a lot of fun, because that's where it's brand new and shiny, and nothing's gone wrong yet, and everything is just a possibility. Mm-hmm. So the plotting stage actually is quite a lot of fun, and I'll spend certainly a variety of weeks doing that. And I do with any book. There are a number of plotting techniques I like. You can look at Hero's Journey, you can look at the 3-act plotting structure, you can look at a variety of things, and I like a number of different plotting techniques, because quite often, it'll take something, and you're never sure what it is, to knock things loose in your head and get them cascading. Right. So I tend to, sort of hammer away at it until something cascades, and then I've got enough to go on. And generally speaking, I won't plot a book entirely, because a book will always surprise you, and things change once you start writing. They always do. So if I've got a 3-act book, I know very well what's going to happen in Act 1, and I have a somewhat good idea of what's going to happen in Act 2, and I have a vague idea of what will happen in Act 3. There was, just to give you an example, in this particular book, there was one of my 2 heroines was supposed to die at the end originally, and I didn't realize that wasn't going to happen until I'd say I was about the 80% mark, and I realized, no, I don't think I'm going to kill her after all.
Wow.
Wow. Well, that is all that we have for now, and I am so grateful that you took the time to sit with us and answer our questions, and I'm really excited for the blog tour to kick off, because from what I've heard, people are loving this book, so it's going to be a lot of fun.
Well, thank you very much for reading it and enjoying it, and feel free to shoot me an email or hit me up on social media if you have any more questions, or if there's anything I can do to boost your reviews or anything when they come out.
Okay.
Great. Thank you,
Thanks,
Kate.
Kate.
Thanks,
Thank you, and have a good Memorial Day weekend.
All right.
You too.
You too. Thanks, Trish. Thanks,
Bye.
everyone.
Thanks.
Yep.